We tend to look for purpose in success, don't we? In our achievements or those moments of pure happiness. But what happens when all of that is taken away? What is left when the life we've carefully built is just gone? This is the difficult but absolutely essential question at the heart of Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. He wrote this in just 9 days after surviving the Holocaust. It's really less a book to be read and more work to be absorbed. It offers this quiet, powerful insight into the resilience of the human spirit.
So the book doesn't start with an answer. It starts with a question it forces every one of us to confront. When everything you define yourself by is stripped away, your job, your home, your relationships, even your own name, what is actually left? It's a really confronting thought, I know, but it's the necessary starting point for understanding what Frankl discovered. Let's just sit with that for a moment. Right here we find Frankl's answer. This single insight, discovered in the most unimaginable circumstances, becomes the anchor for everything else in the book. He realized that while absolutely everything external could be controlled by his captors, one thing remained completely untouchable: his inner freedom to choose his own attitude, to decide how he would meet his circumstances. This is the central thread we're going to follow throughout our exploration today.
So here's the path we'll walk today. We're going to start by understanding the context, the concentration camps, not for shock value, but to really grasp the environment where these ideas were tested. Then we'll look at Frankl himself, and a key point of intellectual honesty that often gets missed. From there, we'll dive into the core insight about our inner freedom, examine the practical framework he created called logotherapy, and finally, we'll look at the 3 paths to meaning he outlined and the powerful shift in perspective that this offers all of us.
Okay, so we begin with the experience itself. To really understand Frankl's insight, we have to first understand the world that tested it. You see, the camps were designed for more than just physical destruction. They were an environment engineered to systematically dismantle the human spirit.
Everything that anchored a person's identity was just taken. A name became a number. Family photos, clothes, even a person's hair, all gone. Now, this was so much more than physical hardship. It was a profound psychological assault. It was designed to create a state of apathy, this emotional numbness, where a person began to believe they had absolutely no control, no agency over their own fate. And as a trained psychiatrist, Frankl noticed a chilling pattern. The prisoners who gave up hope, the ones who lost any sense of a future, they were often the first to die. It was as if their bodies just gave up soon after their spirit had. They had lost their why for enduring the horrific how. This observation, made in the most extreme conditions you can imagine, was a tragic, powerful validation of Nietzsche's words: "He who has a why to live for can bear almost any how."
So, who was this man making these observations? Well, understanding Viktor Frankl's background is crucial, because the ideas that he tested in the camps were not actually born there.
Frankl was already an established neurologist and psychiatrist in Vienna long before the war. And on this timeline, that year 1941, it holds this quiet but incredibly profound detail. He had a visa to escape to America. He had a way out, a path to safety, and he let it expire. He chose to stay because he could not bring himself to abandon his elderly parents. That single choice, made before he ever set foot in a camp, is a powerful, early expression of his entire philosophy. That meaning is so often found not in chasing our own desires, but in answering the call of responsibility.
And this brings us to a point of intellectual honesty that is so often overlooked. It's really easy to assume that Frankl developed these ideas because of his suffering. But that isn't true. He had already formulated the core principles of his meaning-centered therapy, which he called logotherapy, before the war even began. He even had a manuscript with him that was confiscated at Auschwitz. So the camps didn't create his philosophy. They served as its most brutal and validating test. This wasn't some coping mechanism born out of desperation. It was a pre-existing conviction that was truly tested by fire.
This brings us to the absolute core insight of the book. Amidst the complete loss of external freedom, Frankl realized there was one freedom, just one, that could never ever be taken away.
One single, unassailable freedom.
Frankl's core insight is captured in this simple but profound idea. Between what happens to us, that's the stimulus, and how we react, that's the response, there is a space. For many of us, most of the time, that space is almost invisible. An event happens and an automatic reaction just follows. Frankl's great discovery was that within that tiny space lies our ultimate freedom, our power to choose our response. We may not control what happens to us, but the attitude we bring to it is always in the end our own decision. So,
Here is the first small, quiet action that this idea invites. And look, it's not about some dramatic life change. It's much smaller. Sometime this week, when you run into a minor, unavoidable frustration, you're stuck in traffic, waiting in a long line, whatever it is, just pause. Notice that automatic reaction that starts to build up inside you. And in that moment, see if you can find that little space between the event and your feeling about it. The goal isn't to force yourself to feel happy about it, not at all. It's simply to notice that you have a choice in your response. That's the entire practice.
This core insight about our freedom to choose became the foundation for Frankl's entire life's work. He didn't just leave it as a philosophical idea. He developed it into a practical therapeutic framework. He called it logotherapy. It comes from the Greek word logos, which can be translated as meaning. At its core, logotherapy proposes that the most fundamental human drive isn't the pursuit of pleasure or the drive for power, but a deep-seated will to find meaning in our lives.
Now, to really get its significance, it helps to see where it fits. Frankl positioned his work as the third Viennese school of psychotherapy. The first was Freud, who proposed that our primary drive was a will to pleasure. The second was Alfred Adler, who focused on a will to power. Now, Frankl respected their work, but he argued they both missed the most uniquely human motivation, the will to meaning. He suggested that once our basic needs are met, what we seek most profoundly is a sense that our lives actually matter.
Now, from my own experience, this is an idea that is so often misapplied. There's a tendency to hear search for meaning and think it's about this quest for one single grand epic purpose. And this kind of thinking can create a real sense of paralysis. But Frankl's work points us towards something much quieter, much more accessible. He suggests that meaning isn't a destination we finally arrive at, but something we find right here in the present moment, in the task that needs doing, in our connection with another person, or in the courage we bring to an unavoidable difficulty. It's a moment-by-moment practice, not some big one-time discovery.
So, if our primary drive is for meaning, how do we find it? Well, Frankl didn't just leave this as an abstract question. He outlined 3 very concrete paths available to every one of us.
The first path is through creation, by bringing something new into the world, whether that's a piece of art or just a job well done. For Frankl, in the camp, this was the task of mentally reconstructing his lost manuscript. The second path is through experience, by appreciating beauty or connecting deeply with another person. He often wrote about how just holding the image of his wife in his mind gave him a strength that his physical circumstances couldn't touch. And the third path, which is available even when the other two are not, is through our attitude. When we're faced with suffering we can't avoid, we can find meaning in the way we choose to meet that suffering, with courage, with dignity, with grace.
And this brings us to our second action. Just look at the week ahead of you. Can you identify one creative task, one meaningful interaction, or one unavoidable challenge? You don't have to change what you do. The practice is simply to ask yourself, how can I approach this one thing with a quiet sense of purpose? The shift is in your intention, not necessarily in the action itself.
And this brings us to the final and maybe the most profound shift in perspective the book offers. You see, Frankl suggests that many of us are asking the wrong fundamental question of life. We are so often encouraged to ask, what do I want from life? But Frankl suggests a complete reversal of this question. He proposes that we stop asking what we expect from life and instead start asking, what does life expect from us? The answer, he says, isn't found in words or thoughts, but in our actions and in our response to the responsibilities that are placed right in front of us. Frankl tells this powerful story from his clinical practice that illustrates this idea perfectly. An elderly doctor, who was deeply depressed after the death of his wife, came to see him. Frankl listened, and then, instead of just offering comfort, he asked a single question. He asked the doctor, what would have happened if you had died first and your wife had to survive you? The doctor replied that for her it would have been unbearable. Frankl then gently responded, you see, doctor, she has been spared that suffering, and it is you who have spared her. But now you have to pay for it by surviving and mourning her. In that instant, the man's suffering wasn't removed, but it was transformed. It was no longer a meaningless burden. It was a sacrifice. It was an act of enduring love. His pain now had a purpose. The man said nothing, simply shook Frankl's hand and calmly left. This story perfectly illustrates one of Frankl's most famous ideas. He wrote that happiness, just like success, cannot be pursued directly. The more you aim for it, the more you will miss it. Instead, he argued, happiness has to ensue, it has to follow, as the unintended side effect of dedicating ourselves to a cause greater than ourselves or to another person. By focusing on meaning and responsibility, a sense of fulfillment can emerge all on its own.
This leads us to our final action, which is just a simple shift in questioning. The next time you feel a bit stuck or uncertain, gently set aside the question, "What do I want?" and instead ask yourself, "What is being asked of me right now?" This small change can move us from a position of passive waiting to one of quiet, active purpose.
If there's one thing worth remembering, real growth begins when an idea is quietly applied, not loudly admired. I hope this exploration of man's search for meaning has offered you some valuable insights. There's a free one-page action plan with all the steps we discussed, available through the link in the description. Thank you for your time and your reflection today.